All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Falcon Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined by my co-host, Matt Karoly. Today, we're going to be talking quite a bit, catching you guys up on the last couple of weeks where we haven't really had shows, but we got a couple of free agent moves to catch you up on, including a big one made today by the Falcons re-signing Adrian Clayborn. Get your thoughts on that. And we want to sort of come back and give you sort of the recap of our March Madness bracket that we started, what was it, 3 weeks ago, Matt? And,
Yep.
Now we have declared a winner as of this live episode. I don't think it's too shocking who won, but we'll get to that and we'll have some discussions, get some people's thoughts on why they voted for the person who eventually won, or maybe a couple people why they didn't vote for the person who eventually won. And of course, as usual, we'll get to your mailbag questions, but we'll kick things off talking roster moves and getting into that today. Obviously, the big news today is talking about Adrian Clayborn, the big signing today, bringing him back after a year in New England. He signed a one-year deal worth up to $4 million. Matt, you and I remember, I think it was the show we did like the first or second week of January. We had Evan Birchfield on the show. We were talking about how the Falcons need to address their D-line and free agency. That's the thing that they really need to do. And it took, 4 weeks, but they at least made a move on the defensive line. So what were your thoughts seeing the news that Adrian Clayborn is back in Atlanta?
Yeah, not to mention they made a move that, was 100% well received amongst the fan base, which isn't always the case. At least so far this offseason, they've made some head scratchers. So to finally have one that, we've been wanting, ever since, word came out that the Patriots were letting him go. And it just made so much sense. Falcons let Brooks Reed walk, let Bruce Irvin go to Carolina, didn't re-sign Derek Shelby. So they needed to do something on the defensive line and bringing back Adrian Clayborn, who, you could argue they probably shouldn't have let go in the first place. It's good that he's back, and as the song goes, reunited, and it feels so good to have Adrian Clayborn back. And again, it just further illustrates kind of the Falcons' mission so far this offseason is kind of to create as much flexibility as they can with their roster, so that when the draft does kick off, they're not going to have to reach for any particular position. I mean, when you look at their defensive line depth chart now, they got a pretty solid baseline talent at defensive end and defensive tackle. I mean, their top three is Vic Beasley, Takk McKinley, Adrian Clayborn. And then for defensive tackle, it's Grady Jarrett, Jack Crawford, and Deidrin Senat. So, with those being their top three right now, if the season started, that's not too bad. So, again, they don't have to then reach for a particular defensive end, or they don't have to reach for a particular defensive tackle. They can kind of sit where they are and take the best one available, or now, again, with adding Clayborn into the fold, you have another spot on your roster secured. You can go up and be aggressive and get your guy in the draft.
I agree. I think for me, the big thing is now that the Falcons have Adrian Clayborn, we aren't solely relying on Vic Beasley and or a rookie to have to sort of save the Falcons pass rush. So if they can get a rookie, if they can still get a premium pass rusher at some point in this draft, whether that be in the first round or later on in the draft, and now they have the flexibility that they don't have to necessarily pull the trigger on a lesser pass rusher earlier than they may want, just simply due to the fact that they need that position with Clayborn in the fold. And I think, basically having a guy that you can pretty much reliably count on getting you 30, 40 pressures, even if he's not going to necessarily get you the monster sack numbers, but provide that pressure that is much needed for this defense, I think is a big improvement for this Falcons defense. And I, for one, say what you want about the Vic Beasley contract situation and the Falcons' decision to keep him, but I feel, it doesn't save that move, but I feel a lot better that it's not all about saving or salvaging or whatever you want to say Vic Beasley this offseason and this season as far as the Falcons pass rush. And they have three capable, proven, reliable pass rushers now with Clayborn teaming with Grady Jarrett and Jack McKinley. And if Vic Beasley has that sort of rebound season that Dan Quinn and obviously the organization is hoping for, great. But if he doesn't, and he's just basically the same Vic Beasley we've seen the last couple of years, then it shouldn't necessarily tank the Falcons pass rush, which you can argue it kind of did in 2018 when they didn't necessarily get that big boost from him to sort of go with the improvements that both Tack and Grady Jarrett made last year.
Yeah, I agree. Now, my one question for you, in New England this past season, Clayborn played roughly 30% of the snaps, and according to Mike Reese in his article over at ESPN when he broke the news, he was a healthy scratch the final 2 games of the season. Again, I do think he's going to contribute to the pass rush, but I look at him more in the role that they used Dwight Freeney in when they brought Freeney in 2016, where, I think Vic and Tack are still going to get the lion's share of the snaps, and Clayborn's going to be more used rotationally rather than how he was used his first time around. Do you see it that way, or do you think he can still be kind of a de facto starter in Atlanta?
I don't expect him to play nearly as much as he did last time around, particularly in 2017, where he kind of was like the guy, after Grady Jarrett and after Poe in terms of his load. I don't expect that again, but I do expect that, your alternative right now, and we'll see what happens in a couple of weeks after the draft, but your alternative right now is Jack Crawford. And I don't see a situation, based off of who I think Adrian Clayborn is at this point in time and what I think Jack Crawford is. Both of them are, good, solid players. So I don't want to disparage either one of those guys. But I think if the choice is play Adrian Clayborn or play Jack Crawford more snaps, I think the choice is Clayborn at this point. But we'll have to sort of see. I think you're right. If the Falcons can get another premium pass rusher, particularly in the first round, then they have a deep rotation, and therefore you're not going to necessarily need Adrian Clayborn playing 30, 40 snaps or whatever it was the last time he was here in Atlanta. And it can be more of that 20 range that we saw with Dwight Freeney back in 2016. And the Falcons can have a pretty healthy rotation moving, Crawford, Jarrett, Clayborn, and Tack at D tackle position, and anybody else they add in draft, as well as the flexibility of Tack, Beasley, and Clayborn to play the edge again, and anybody else they add in draft. So I think this is a good move to, again, give the team flexibility. But I don't expect it to be the same as the Patriots, because we know the Patriots are basically make roster decisions based purely off of matchups each and every week. So you can get guys that are sort of like, probably not maybe like they're one of their 10 best players, but you can get some guys that are considered key contributors on their team that can be inactive for a game or two every now and then, simply because Bill Belichick that week likes, some of the other matchups that he has.
Yeah, I agree.
So we talked about Adrian Clayborn. There's some other moves that the Falcons have made in the last couple of weeks. Nothing as splashy as that, but they did bring in another free agent in offensive lineman Adam Geddes, formerly of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, formerly of the New York Giants. Did not play football last year, but was in Bucs training camp, familiar with Dirk Cutter, can play some center and guard. They also re-signed Justin Hardy to a 1-year veteran minimum contract. Kamal Ishmael, the linebacker, was also re-signed to a 1-year veteran minimum contract. Geddes, of course, got a 1-year veteran minimum contract. So the Falcons are sort of cleaning up a little bit in the last couple of weeks after it seemed like they were pretty much wrapped up with free agency at least a couple of weeks ago, because these moves were, 2 weeks ago, it seems like. It's been a while since we've been on the air. But, what are your thoughts on sort of the additions of Geddes and the retainings, I guess you could say, of Hardy and Ishmael?
When it comes, when it's concerned with Geddes, I don't see him as much more than a camp body. You mentioned he didn't play football last year. He was kind of on the Bucs. Was he on the Bucs practice squad?
I want to say he got cut at the beginning of
at
the end of training camp, and I don't think he was on the practice squad, but I could be wrong about that.
Okay. I mean, basically, his relative inexperience, I believe he had 17 games of action, one start in his career. He's more or less, a poor man's version of Ben Garland, which, um, again, I don't know. For me, anyways, I think right now, locked in, it's Schweitzer and Fusco as the two backup interior offensive linemen. And then it becomes a question of who's going to be the backup center. I know they dabbled with Schweitzer in training camp in the preseason, and I expect kind of that to be the plan right now. Um, but at the same time, I also think the draft, I think on day 3, potentially they're going to be looking for an interior offensive lineman that does have center experience. So I'm not counting on anything with Adam Geddes. Maybe, the Falcons are still thinking about moving on from Fusco to save some money, depending on who else is out there that they want to spend on. But for me, I'm not expecting anything from this signing. As far as Ishmael and Hardy, again, just along the lines of the Clayborn signing, it just creates more flexibility for them going into the draft. When it comes when you're talking about Hardy, this eases the sting a little bit of not tendering Marvin Hall. Now, I realize that Marvin Hall is kind of a different position in the wide receiver group than Hardy, but Hardy still offers the versatility to play the Y and the Z, which the Y, the slot, and the Z, the other outside receiver spot opposite the X. So again, we had thought that maybe they were creating a hole when they didn't need to, but now having Hardy back, they don't necessarily need to reach for a receiver, but they can still certainly take one. Someone like a Mecole Hardman still is on the table to play that kick returner role and to eventually, take over for Hardy and, long term. As far as Ishmael's the type of guy that I just think Dan Quinn loves. I mean, he's not a Dan Quinn pick or anything, but, he's a guy that can wear many hats on this defense, playing multiple linebacker spots, can play strong safety in a pinch, and he's a big special teams contributor. So getting him back, I think, just goes to show you that they're not too keen on this linebacker class, which makes a lot of sense because, the pickings are slim there. There's definitely guys that fit the Falcon mold, like a Jermaine Pratt, but, you got to contend with 31 other teams for these players. So, you don't want to be in a position where you have to reach for a linebacker. So I can easily see them punting on linebacker. And again, signings like this make the team more flexible and also allow them to be more aggressive because they don't need necessarily all these draft picks to fill out their roster. They're kind of doing that now with these low budget signings. So again, really happy that they can get these guys back and get them back at the vet min price tag, which, always bodes well for the team. So yeah, I'm super happy with Hardy and Ishmael. Geddes, it is what it is. We'll see what happens. Maybe he surprises me and does become, Garland 2.0, but I'm not counting on that.
Yeah, I'll be curious to watch the camp battle on the interior to see sort of right now. I think you nailed it in terms of right now who's going to be the sort of utility guy that fills Ben Garland's shoes as the guy that can be the backup at both center and guard. And with Fusco, Schweitzer, and Geddes being the 3 top options there, sort of competing for the job. And I agree with you. I think, and part of this is due to the fact that Fusco's recovering from an injury. But if the season were to start today, I think it would be Schweitzer's job to lose. So we'll have to sort of see how that competition plays out. But I agree with you. I think Geddes is probably on the outside looking in as far as the roster is concerned, but he'll have a shot and he'll have an opportunity to sort of compete, and he could certainly surprise us. It wouldn't be the first time this happened in a training camp competition. Hardy and Ishmael at the beginning of the free agents starting period, I did not expect either of those guys back. I'm certainly happy that they are back. I think this does give the team some, as you said, flexibility in the draft. But I do expect both of those positions to be addressed with with 2 of their 9 draft picks. And I think you're right with a guy like Mecole Hardman or some other option at that wide receiver position that has the sort of return skills that we didn't necessarily see in Justin Hardy last season. Justin Hardy's an offensive player. I hope he gets more opportunities on offense. He's kind of been marginalized the last couple of years, in part due to the additions of players like Mohamed Sanu and Calvin Ridley. I thought he showed a lot of promise in his rookie season, but is sort of due to other additions the Falcons have made. Taylor Gabriel is also on that list, has sort of not really gotten the opportunity that I think he's deserved. And when he has gotten playing time, I think he's been very productive for the Falcons. But we'll have to see if he gets more of an opportunity this year and not just sort of be this role player that comes in to run block and play special teams, which he didn't get. Other than being a return specialist, he didn't get too many opportunities in coverage last year. And Ishmael, you're right. I think he's a solid player, solid depth piece. And we'll sort of have to see, him and Bruce Carter competing. I think once the Falcons re-sign Bruce Carter at the start of the free agent signing period, that's part of the reason why I expected Ishmael to not come back. And, bringing both those guys back in addition to, seeing what Foye Oluokun does and potentially adding a draft pick probably somewhere in the middle rounds. I think, the Falcons should be stronger at the linebacker position, which has been a questionable spot on their defense the last couple of years from time to time. So, both of these I think are really good moves for the Falcons.
If the Falcons did end up selecting a linebacker, say on round 4 or 5, what do you think that means for some of the other guys on the roster? Do you think it means more that, Devondre Campbell's all but gone? Do you think it means Duke Riley is fighting for his roster spot heading into 2019? What do you think it would mean if they selected a linebacker in that range?
Well, I think I look at the linebacker group, and I think of the current guys on the roster, I think Deion Jones and Foye Oluokun and Devondre Campbell are the only guys that are locks to make the team this year. I think Riley, I think Carter, I think Ishmael will have to compete for jobs. And I think, not to sit here and say that, they're on the bubble or anything like that. I would expect those guys to have certainly better and potentially significantly better than average shots of making the team. But I do see the situation potentially where if the Falcons do bring in a young, talented rookie that shows a lot of promise, right from the start, that it could push one of those players out the door, with either probably Carter being the most vulnerable guy just because he's a little bit older and has less experience with the team. So, he's a relatively, compared to, Ishmael, who's been here for 4 years, and Riley, who's been here for, now 2+. He's a relatively unknown commodity. And so the coaching staff may not be as sort of firmly committed to him and what he can bring to the table as they would for the other guys. So I think, it's going to be, you look at the Falcons roster in a lot of these positions across the team where they've shored up some of their depth. I think it means that the Falcons have the flexibility to give away some of their picks, but I don't think it's as sort of like to the degree where I think a lot of people are like, oh, the Falcons, there's no way that the Falcons can draft 9 players. And you're probably right. They probably won't draft 9 players, but I certainly think they could draft 7 or 8 players. And, I think people are sort of taking it as, oh, they don't have that many holes, and so they're definitely going to trade up and or make a big trade up, I should say. I do expect them to trade up at some point, but it may not be the big blockbuster move that I think a lot of people are expecting. So I think the Falcons are doing a good job of sort of making it so that they don't have pressing depth issues on a lot of roster spots. But I think a lot of these moves that they've made this offseason aren't necessarily being like, oh, that's no longer on the table as far as the draft pick goes.
Yeah, I don't think any of what you said is wrong. I mean, when you're looking at a lot of these contracts, they're all vet min deals. So nothing's really guaranteed for any of these guys. Like you said, they're still competing for their jobs. They have a good shot to keep the jobs because they're veterans. They've been around the team for a while. But yeah, none of these positions are certainly locked in where it's like, yeah, they won't draft that position. I think, I said it on Twitter. I think the only 2 positions really in my mind where they wouldn't draft, and they can still draft one of these because it's quarterback and you can always draft a developmental guy, but I think it's quarterback and running back. Other than that, I mean, they can pretty much draft every other position on this roster.
Yeah, I don't think they should draft a running back, but it wouldn't totally shock me if they did.
Yeah.
In like round 6 or round 7 and be like, hey, this guy that we really liked, let's take a flyer on him.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that on one of the other shows too. If they did draft a running back, I think it was you that said this. I mean, it probably means they're not as confident in Devontae's health heading into 2019, depending on where he's drafted. I mean, if he's if he's drafted 6th, 7th round, I don't. You probably can't read too much into it. But if he's drafted 4th, 5th round, then you could probably make that conclusion that they're not too comfortable with Devontae's health.
Yeah. So the last bit of free agent news before we get to the March Madness bracket is the fact the Falcons had a couple of visitors in the last week. They had Tyler Davidson, the former Saints defensive tackle, in this week on Monday. They had Rashid Hageman. That was a little bit of a surprise last week. And they also had Leonard Westard, the former Buccaneers offensive tackle, in last week on, I think, the same day that they signed Ishmael and Geddes. So those guys visited, meaning the Falcons at the very least are kicking the tires on more depth on the defensive and offensive line. And we'll have to sort of see, generally speaking, in past years when the Falcons bring in a free agent, they usually sign that guy within 24 hours. But there have been times where they sign a guy many weeks after they bring him in for a free agent visit. So we'll have to sort of see if the Falcons revisit those guys in the near future or down the road. But what were your thoughts on seeing some of these guys, cross the paths in Florida Bridge?
Well, the Tyler Davidson one is simply just the Falcons dropping a subliminal message that they're going to take Ed Oliver, since if you unscramble Tyler Davidson's name, you can get Ed Oliver in there. So that's all that one has to do with. No, but all joking aside, I think this one makes sense because I do think also getting another nose tackle is potentially a need for the Falcons. Obviously Dexter Lawrence's name is being thrown around in the draft, early on, but I think it would make more sense to get a guy like Tyler Davidson, or Danny Shelton's name's been thrown out for the Falcons. So I'd be cool with it. I want to see Adrian Clayborn, get more time. Hopefully they take the handcuffs off in his second season, but getting a guy like Davidson who, has some good tape on film from that one tech spot, just to, push Clayborn a little bit more and make him earn it. And, again, you can never have too much depth for a Dan Quinn defensive line rotation. So, if they sign Tyler Davidson, I'd be for it. Then you wouldn't have to, hopefully you wouldn't have to worry about them taking Dexter Lawrence in round 1 or 2, because I think that's just kind of an overreach. That's just a reach for kind of the talent and the skill set that Lawrence would bring to the table. Hageman, like you and like many, kind of very confusing that they would even think to bring him in, based on the culture and stuff that they've built here, and the fact that kind of, Hageman broke their trust. I don't know what more they need to know about him, but we'll see what happens there. I guess it's just due diligence. And then, Wester at right tackle, it would be interesting if they would bring him in. What does that say about their draft plans? Because I do think with Adrian Clayborn signing today, I think it does strengthen the argument that right tackle is very much in play with that round 1 selection. But if they brought Wester in, is he competing with Gano? Like, is Gano's job maybe not safe? And that's what that would be for. So that would be an interesting one if it happens. But we'll see what happens. Like you said, they usually do end up pulling the trigger on one of these moves. So I wouldn't be shocked if, tomorrow or Thursday, we get another signing.
The Davison one is interesting to me because I feel like even more so than it was last year when the Falcons signed Terrell McClain, who had some positional flexibility. I don't know if Davison has that same sort of positional versatility as far as which role he plays at the D tackle position, whether he's a 1 tech or a 3 tech. And so I think, truly he's more of a 1 tech. And the Falcons have had a history in recent years with Terrell McClain, with Dontari Poe, guys that when we signed them, we're like, oh, that guy's a 1 tech, that guy's a nose tackle. And then the Falcons played him at the 3 tech. And so I wonder with Davison, if the Falcons were to sign him, would that mean we would get to see a little bit more of Adrian not playing that 3 tech in the base defense, which I think isn't necessarily his ideal role in the defense, but I do think as far as between those two guys, who do I think can play that role a little bit better? I think that is Adrian Sanat. And so I would be curious to sort of see if that was something that the Falcons were sort of tinkering with. And that's kind of where the Falcons' interest in Dexter Lawrence, to me, I think is sort of in that vein where they had a guy like Dontari Poe playing that 3-tech role 2 years ago and back in 2017, even though he looked like the classic nose tackle. And I think that's kind of, if they were to draft Dexter Lawrence in round 2, not in round 1, I think that's probably the role that they would sort of envision for him, playing more of that big, powerful 3-tech role, which seemingly the last couple of years is what they're sort of looking at for that role based off of, the additions of Poe and McClain. So that would be interesting. The Hageman thing, I'm like you, it's a little surprising to see him, sort of cross paths. I wonder if it's just simply like, since he was recently employed, was it a serious sort of visit, like they were really intrigued with signing him, or is it, purely just kicking the tires, like, oh, you're in town, might as well come down and work out for us, and we'll talk and see what's going on with you and catch up on the last 2 years. So that's what I assumed it was, but who knows? And then the Leonard Wester thing, I don't think that would affect their draft plans at all. I think that's even more of a camp body than necessarily Adam Geddes would be. Or maybe he might push Matt Gano to a certain extent. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily think that move means anything other than he's a better option than, an undrafted free agent that they might bring to camp or something like that.
Yeah, the thing with, playing Sanat at that 3-tech, if they dabbled with that, one of the things I was hoping Dan Quinn would get away from, and I think we saw a little bit of it this past season, is just getting away from that true, like, all right, this is our run-stopping unit. Let's put those 4 out. And then, all right, it's obvious passing down. Let's get our pass-rushing unit in. I'm waiting for the day where it's just like, we're going to get our best 4 in there. We're going to find guys that can affect the run and the pass. And, we're not going to let teams kind of manipulate what they do or how we play based on our, defensive line rotation. So if they were to bring in Davison and kind of use Sanat more in that 3-tech role and have Davison play the 1-tech, I just feel like they're not making any progress on that plan. And teams are going to continue to either, pass at will on us because we got those 2 guys in and they're not our best pass rusher from the interior spot. Or, when you take those guys out, all right, we're going to check to a run and we're going to run up, up the middle on you all day. So again, if that's their thinking, I would have some issues with that. Hopefully it's just, all right, we need another 1-tech to kind of replace the body that we lost with Terrell McClain, and we don't want to draft anyone like that high, but we'll see what happens. That would be my one issue, though, if that's what the plan is with Davison.
Okay. All right, guys, let's talk a little bit about this March Madness bracket. And I will give you the floor, Matt. I checked the poll a couple hours ago. I wanted to be held in suspense for the actual show a little bit so I could find out with the listeners who won the top Falcon player in the last 25 years. For those of you that missed our last show, we sort of unveiled this back, at the start of the NCAA tournament to sort of coincide with the NCAA tournament. We came up with a bracket of 32 Falcon players, 16 of whom currently are on the team, 16 of whom were former Falcons. And with the idea, we were going to keep it to like the last 25 years, but we made a little bit of an exception for Deion Sanders to stretch it a little bit, and sort of had these guys go head to head. We ranked them, seeded them, all that type of stuff, 1 through 16. And had, former Falcons going up against current Falcons. And, as you probably could have guessed, a lot of the current Falcons tended to dominate the sort of the Final Four. I think Roddy White was the only former Falcon that made it to the Final Four. And so, we got a final battle between, you probably could have guessed it, Matt Ryan and Julio Jones as the greatest Falcon of the last 25 years. And Matt, I will now give you the floor to break it down.
Yeah, so this was one where I thought it would be a little bit closer than it turned out being, but I do think the people got it right. Surprise, surprise, Matt Ryan was voted the greatest Falcon of the last 25 years. Final tally was 63% to 37%. And we asked the viewers to kind of give their reason why they chose Matt over Julio. And so I'm going to read off some of the better answers that we got from the people. So the first one was from Justin Shelley at JCShelley06. I went Matt Ryan because even though Julio is top of his position, the Falcons didn't have a quarterback. They still wouldn't have back-to-back winning seasons, let alone everything he's helped the team accomplish. We fired a coach with a winning record because we expected more. And I think that last line's, pretty memorable just because of the fact that because Matt Ryan's here, there's now this expectation of winning. And I don't think that was ever there really before he got there in 2008. So I think from that standpoint, Matt was the reason that that's here in Atlanta. And I think that's a good answer for why he deserved it over Julio. The next one comes from Tiger Turner at Tiger Turner 33. Matt Ryan, because he's done great with so many different players and coaches. Still can't believe he made Harry Douglas a 1,000-yard receiver. And again, that last line too is another memorable one. I mean, I think that is a defining part of Matt Ryan's legacy, to be able to take Roddy White and Julio Jones and Tony Gonzalez and make them good receivers. I mean, that's kind of easy for anybody, for most quarterbacks to do, but to do it for Harry Douglas, who is a good number 3 option, but nothing really more than that. So to take him and make him a 1,000-yard receiver, I think that's pretty good. Next one, Reeves at Reeves G55. It's Ryan all the way. Longevity, stability, and health. Never missed a game. Knock on wood. Combined with bringing a franchise from their star quarterback going to jail, coach quitting mid-season, and a 4-12 season to first back-to-back winning seasons, multiple playoffs, and all the franchise records. I mean, yeah, he pretty much summed it up all in that tweet right there, as far as what the Falcons organization was like when Matt Ryan first got there, and the fact that he quickly turned them around, got them to the playoffs. I mean, it's hard not to pick Matt Ryan, and I think that's the big thing as far as if Matt Ryan and Julio Jones came to Atlanta the same year, maybe Julio would have a better argument. But I think those first couple years that Matt was there, that he helped turn the franchise around and did it without Julio, I think that's kind of why he is the slam dunk choice. Now, again, I can see why people would pick Julio because of the fact, and Justin kind of mentioned it earlier, as far as him being the top of his position. But I think this last one that I want to read, I think is probably my favorite answer, and it comes from at J O'Neill 31. He voted Julio, and he said he's more dominant relative to his position peers than Matt is, and he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. But he's glad Matty Ice got shown this much love, at least on Twitter, because as Falcons fans, we know, Matt's kind of one of the more underrated or disrespected players, especially at his position. So, to finally him get his just due, I know it's amongst Falcons fans, but, it's always a good time when Matt Ryan's getting some love on Twitter. And he got love throughout this tournament. Most of his contests, weren't even close. I think he got 90% of most of the votes up until this final game. And kind of, it was mostly a chalk tournament, just like the regular NCAA tournament. But I think that shows you that, Aaron, we did pretty good seeding some of these guys, which it wasn't an easy task, especially some of the former players. It was certainly tough having to cut some guys and put some guys in there. But I think all in all, it was fun to see how some of these matchups, the people viewed them. I know, we did have a lot of younger viewers, so some of the older guys probably didn't get their just due, like Jesse Tuggle losing to Deion Jones. But, I told you on Twitter, I think in a couple of years, that might not seem as far-fetched.
Yeah, look, what I'm going to say is shame on all you people for voting. Deion Jones just did. Look, Deion Jones is great, but like,
other than that one though, is that like, how would you have had this?
That was the only one. That
okay.
Like, looking at it and sort of to see Deion Jones make it to the Final Four, I was just kind of like, him getting to the Elite Eight, no problems with, but sort of.
Yeah, because he beat Jamal Anderson, which it was kind of cool seeing Jamal see that on Twitter and call out Deion. But yeah, other than that, I mean, I don't know. I think it was pretty fair to see him make it that far.
Yeah, because if my recollection is like among the first round matchups, his with Matt Bryant was
That was close.
Yeah, it was relatively close. And then
Yeah.
sort of him to like, it's not like he did a Matt Ryan or a Julio and just sort of like won 95% of the vote from that point
Right.
on. But it was like pretty significant margins of him beating pretty much everybody else by at least 60-70% of the vote. And it was just like, look, I like Deion Jones, guys, but you got to do a little bit more than two good years to be, to me at least, to make it as far as he did. But I know it's a little bit of a quirk of the seeding that sort of helped him out.
I'm with you. I mean, but we know how much the people love Deion Jones. I mean, me and you are usually pounding the table saying Grady Jarrett, Keanu Neal are the most indispensable defensive players on this team. Everyone likes to say, no, it's Deion Jones. And that just kind of held true with this bracket is, they love them some Deion Jones. And if you're going to be intercepting Drew Brees, I mean, that's going to get you fans very quickly. So I wasn't shocked. I was a little shocked that Jesse Tuggle, again, wasn't able to put up more of a fight with the fan base. But, most of the audience, myself included, I became a Falcons fan in 2002. So I didn't really get to watch Jesse Tuggle play, but I know the type of impact he had and the legacy he had. I mean, to get 200 tackles, I mean, that's ridiculous. So other than that, though, I mean, I thought the tournament was cool, confirmed a lot of things that I had thought or was hoping would get confirmed. So, maybe we'll do it again next year. We'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to sort of see, sort of probably not too much on the former bracket. I mean, we probably could tweak a couple
maybe
of
just
guys.
keep a current one or something.
But to sort of see if we were to do it next year, who how we would differently rank certain current players and whatnot.
Right.
I imagine, maybe Jake Matthews isn't the 8th seed on next year's bracket for the current team.
Yep.
Maybe. Who knows? All right, guys. There you have it. That definitely, as Matt said, that was a fun little experiment to sort of see, Deion Jones. I knew he was beloved, but I didn't think he was that beloved by his fan base. But I have to, I figured Mohamed Sanu would go a lot further than I thought he would in this. But I guess he drew Matt Ryan in the second round, so he kind of got screwed there. But
did he? I thought he.
Oh no, Brookings actually beat him in the first round, didn't he?
Is that who it was? Yeah, that was an interesting one too. I mean, I'm with you. I thought Muhammad could beat him, but I guess Brookings still has a lot of fans, which, based on the quotes that he had after he left the team, I thought that would have lost a few, but I guess not. So yeah, that was an interesting one for sure. And then I think also, just last point for me, Michael Turner probably was one of the ones we had seeded wrongly. I think, him being a 14 going up against Alex Mack, that was probably the most nail biting matchup. I think that was like 51-49 Mack, which that was one I was looking to see confirmation on because, for me, I had always thought from that year that he signed with the team, he was Dimitroff's best work in free agency, and a lot of people felt that it was Michael Turner. But I think people are starting to come around that it's Alex Mack. But it was a narrow margin. So I think for him, he probably got the short end of the stick in that first round matchup, having to face Mack. If he would have faced someone else, maybe he could have won a game or two.
Yeah, potentially. Well, Deion Jones was the 4th seed, so he wouldn't have won that one, apparently.
No.
But maybe if we had maybe tweaked it a little bit. So it's something to revisit next year. And obviously, if you guys have certain suggestions, you can always sort of submit them. Leave a comment on YouTube, or you know how to hit us up. We'll get there at the end of the show. So let's wrap things up and jump into the mailbag. We got some interesting questions, a little bit tongue in cheek, I think, from Atlanta Falcons here. His first question is: will Adrian Clayborn supplant Vic as the starter by week 1 or by the bye week? This is, by the way, the most serious question.
Yeah, I was going to say this is probably one we can take serious. The rest of them will be something, but. I'm going to stick with what we said at the top of the show. I think he's going to mainly be used in that rotational role that Dwight Freeney was. Maybe he'll get a little bit more run than Freeney did since he's a little younger. But I think Vic's, look, they're hitching their wagon to Vic Beasley in 2019. They're paying him $12.81 million. He's going to be getting 60-70% of the snaps like he's been. This is a prove it year for him. And, if he's going to prove it, they got to give him an opportunity to prove it. So, Yeah, I think he'll be the starter kind of throughout the season. And Clayborn will come off the bench in that rotational role, inside or outside in the nickel.
Yeah, I imagine right now, based off of the roster, and obviously, again, we got the draft coming up, and that will certainly, or has the potential to change things. Right now, I imagine, the Falcons' nickel front is going to be Tack and Vic at the ends, and Clayborn and Jarrett on the interior, with Jack Crawford rotating in there. And I expect them to get an edge rusher at some point in the draft, potentially again in round one. That will also sort of add to that and give them a solid sort of 6-man group to rush, primarily on passing downs, and also give maybe a couple of those guys some opportunities on rundowns and do away with sort of the base nickel dichotomy that they've had the last couple of years that you just spoke on a couple of minutes ago. So I think you're right in terms of Clayborn supplanting Vic in week one. No, I think Vic's going to get every opportunity to prove himself. If he does so, then he'll continue to get opportunities. It wouldn't totally shock me if, some circumstances where, he continues to struggle, continues to be less effective, that the Falcons might dial back his snaps, but you would need somebody as an option to replace him. Maybe that's Adrian Clayborn, and you would see a shift to a 4-man front that's Tack and Clayborn at the edges and Crawford and Jarrett on the interior. And again, with the possibility of a rookie, being inserted in that as well. So I think that's a possibility later in the season, but it's all going to depend on Vic Beasley. And I think you're right, Matt. He's going to get every opportunity to either succeed or fail this season. And that includes getting more opportunities than probably Adrian Clayborn at this point. Our next question comes from Atlanta Falcons, which at first glance might seem serious, but I don't know if it is. He asks, who will win the battle for the open interior D-line spot, Hageman or Dexter Lawrence?
I'm going to throw a curveball at you. I'm going to go with Paul Soliai. I think, with them looking at Hageman, I think they're going to open up Pandora's box of their former defensive lineman. And I think, given the Tyler Davison connection, I think they're looking at a one tech. And, I don't know about you, but in 2015, I was not disappointed in Paul Soliai's play. I thought he played his role well. And again, they're looking to get nasty and physical up front and try to stop the run. So I think, Paul Soliai makes a lot of sense in that role. So I'm going to go with Paul Soliai.
Yeah, we've been, Soliai, after he left Atlanta, went to Carolina, sabotaged their D-line. He sent Don Terry Poe to Carolina last year, sabotaged the D-line. So Bruce Irvin did it this year.
Wow.
So,
it's meant to happen. It's meant to happen.
Yeah. So, we've done this a couple of years. So I think that's interesting, as a side note. But yeah, man, who's going to win that open D tackle spot? I have no idea. You mentioned taking it back. If you're going to take it back to Paul Soliai, you got to take it back to Tyson Dirty Money Jackson.
Yeah, that's right.
Nobody belly flops on, wide receivers and quarterbacks better than Tyson Jackson does. So I think, the Falcons could sort of dust him off and bring him back and see what he can bring to the table if they're in the idea of bringing back former D linemen that weren't necessarily the most popular people on the roster when they were playing. So I think, Jackson would be a nice veteran option to help, coach up some of these young D linemen that the Falcons are going to potentially have this season there on the interior.
For sure. One serious point I do want to talk about Dexter Lawrence again. The reason I'm so against taking him in round 1 or round 2 is I just think if you're going to draft him, you're basically casting aside Deidrin Senat, because again, I don't see as much of a role for Lawrence, at least not early on in the nickel. And if you're going to take a defensive tackle early at pick 14 or 45, it's got to be someone that's going to help them and be an upgrade over Jack Crawford in the interior pass rush. And I just don't see that being Dexter Lawrence. So that's why, again, I understand they want to get more physical up front and stop the run, but Deidrin Senat can play that role for them. He just needs to be given the chance now in year 2, and he wasn't necessarily given that as much as he should have probably. in 2018. So that's my beef with the Lawrence pick. Again, I'll be able to talk myself into it if that's what happens, but I'm not going to be happy with it initially, just for those reasons. Because again, I think you're pushing aside a really good and useful player in Deidrin Sanat to be that base one tech, and I think if anything, Sanat can give you the same type of stuff that you might hope for in the pass rush from Lawrence. I think there's upside there. He didn't get a chance to show it as much, but if you watch his college tape, there's definitely a smidge there, and I kind of made the comparison to Javon Hargrave a little bit from Pittsburgh. I think Hargrave is starting to develop a little bit of a pass rush for the Steelers, and I think Sanat, maybe not in year 2, but year 3, he can potentially be a presence there. Kind of like Mebane too. Brandon Mebane, offered some pass rush at his peak of his career. So again, if they take a Lawrence, I think you're pushing aside a very good and useful player in Sanat.
Well, as I said, I don't think Lawrence's role with this team would overlap with Sanat. So I think they would play together. And again, I think the Falcons, if they drafted Lawrence, would put him in the same role that they had Dontari Poe a couple of years ago, where Poe was playing the 3 tech and Grady Jet was splitting reps towards the end of the season with Ataba Rubin at that 1 technique spot. And I think you could still keep a Sanat at that 1 tech and then play a guy like Lawrence at the 3 tech, and I think that would still work, and you wouldn't be marginalizing either one of those guys. I guess for me, the question I have with Dexter Lawrence, who I think is a good player, I've always sort of seen, going into the season, I thought he was the best guy on that Clemson D line. I don't think he was like the best pass rusher, the guy with the highest upside, but I thought for what he is the best version of the player that what he is. I think, I've been, moved up on, I guess you could say, on Farrell and Wilkins since then, to the point that now I think he's kind of the third guy. But I do think he's a solid sort of second round guy that can give you some value both on rundowns and give you a little bit of juice relative to how big he is on passing downs. But I think sort of while he could play the Dontari Poe role in this Falcons defense, I don't think he's quite, based off what I've seen, I don't think he's Poe. And I think Poe is, this sort of unique guy that I think Poe, sorry, thinking about it. Poe is sort of this unique guy that was this freak of nature at 350 pounds, and I don't think Lawrence is that dude. So that's part of the reason why I think any talk of him being in a round 1 option is for the Falcons. Maybe for another team that has a different scheme and whatnot, it would be a different conversation. But I think he's on their radar in round 2. I think he would be a solid pick. I think he could grow and eventually be a poor man's Dontari Poe, but I don't think they're on the same plane as players. I don't think he's on the same level as Vita Vea was a year ago. So I think, all the talk of, and the last thing I'll say about Lawrence is, a lot of people seem to be trying to connect the dots as usual when it comes to player visits. And it's like, oh, they visited him with him twice. That means they're thinking about him at pick 14. It doesn't mean that at all. It means Dexter Lawrence, you need to do your homework on him because, he had a suspension. He's had some issues with his weight. And, as we saw with Poe, if you're going to play in this scheme, you're going to need to be lighter. And if he's going to play at 350 or 340, that may not cut it. And the Falcons need to figure out, can he, handle slimming down and all these other things that they have to sort of do their due diligence on, which requires you to visit with him versus a guy like Christian Wilkins, who is 100% clean. You know exactly what you're getting with Christian Wilkins. So you don't need to do, this in-depth detailed thing, because everything you're going to find about Christian Wilkins, like you don't even have to meet with Christian Wilkins because he checks every box. So I think that's part of my frustration where it's people are extrapolating sort of like, oh, they visit with this guy a whole bunch means they must really like him. And that means they're going to take him in round 1. It could mean that, or it could mean that they have a lot of question marks that they need to get answered from this guy. And the fact that they don't visit with another guy doesn't mean that they don't like the guy. It just means they don't need to visit with them. That's all. And so that's the other thing that bothers me about the whole Dexter Lawrence thing.
Yeah, we got into some good debates last draft season about visits and stuff, but in this particular case, I think you're absolutely right. A guy like that, you need to do your homework and due diligence on, and I think that's really more what it is, not necessarily that this is one of the Falcons' top choices in round 1 or round 2 or wherever he goes.
Matt, I know you're getting a little low on the battery there. You got time for another question, or you want to duck out here?
I mean, I don't know necessarily exactly. I guess I'm at 14 minutes. My Mac is telling me, so let's fire away. If I cut out, that's why, and I apologize.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just close the
Yeah,
show solo if Matt
yeah.
disappears on us. So our next question for Vienna Falcons is: will Noah Fant beat out Tyson Biller for the right tackle spot?
I think there's a chance this could happen. Is Noah Fant going to be available at pick 14? Is this the player that the Falcons maybe are moving up for? Who knows? Time will tell. I do think there's, Vienna's making a good connection here. Falcons have already brought in 2 tight ends in free agency, bringing one more to provide even more help for that right side of the offensive line. Makes a lot of sense. So I'm not going to rule it out. I think there's a very good chance that Noah Fant could be the Falcons' starting right tackle in 2019.
Well, look, people, we talk a lot about sort of how Ty Sambrailo played down the stretch at the right tackle position, played pretty solid. But I think the best football we've seen from Ty Sambrailo was down the stretch in 2017 when they were sort of using him as that second tight end when Levine Toilolo was out of line.
I'm going to stop you right there because I was very disappointed. I don't know if it was I want to say it was the Cowboys game at home, but he had a shot in the end zone. They threw it to him, and it went. And I told him I tweeted at him, Ty, you need to get on the jugs machine, man. This is unacceptable. So, you're not wrong, but at the same time, I want to see more from him if he's going to cut it as a full-time tight end for the Falcons.
That's fair. You're right. There is some room for improvement, as I think there's probably some potential room for improvement. Noah Fant playing right tackle.
True.
Beefing up. But he's got the athleticism. He's got the quickness. He's got the explosiveness. 6'4", 245 pounds or whatever he is. I think that's about the size of Mario Addison maybe. I think he could probably handle that guy.
I think so.
On the edge maybe. You look for athletes at that right tackle spot. So a positional swap, and we've seen a Falcon tight end play right tackle for us in Toilolo a couple of years back. So you see who is it, Jake Fisher for the Bengals?
Yeah, he's making the conversion.
Yeah, who I thought or wanted the Falcons to take in round 2 back in 2015. They wanted to take Jalen Collins. We dodged that bullet. That's
yeah. But we got hit by another bullet. So
yeah, pretty much. So. The ricochet. Yeah. So Vienna's last question: how much more scouting knowledge in kilos? Vienna's from Europe. They use a weird metric system, brings hiring the guy that ran the 2017 Ed Oliver Outland Trophy campaign as the VP of Football Communications.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Vienna. I'm not going to convert it to the metric system for you, but I think he gives a lot, and this is why to kind of turn a little bit serious on a lighthearted question. The stars are aligning, people. The stars are aligning for this to happen. Ed Oliver will be an Atlanta Falcon 2019. And it's all because they're hiring the senior associate athletic director, formerly of the Houston Cougars. And, again, the stars are aligning. You can't argue with the stars. They're aligning. So, yeah.
Well, the part of me that's a evil bastard is looking forward to the disappointment that
the petty you. I know you're gonna tweet at me. You're gonna be the first person when this doesn't happen. I know.
Oh God.
I've already made my.
There's the part of me that's going to be upset that the Falcons didn't get Ed Oliver.
Exactly.
Obviously.
Come on.
But the part of me, that's always saying you got to set your expectations low. The fact that Ed Oliver has been the most mocked guy the last couple of years, the most mocked guy isn't the Falcons pick. Last year it was Taven Bryan. The year before that it was Forrest Lamp. The year before that it was who was it in 2016? Darren Lee. I think the year before that was Dante Fowler. So it's just the stars are aligning as far as the mock drafts go. And so when you see all these mock drafts that have the Falcons picking Ed Oliver, I'm like, it's not going to happen now. The mock draft have cursed us and jinxed us in that regard. So I've sort of been like, look, I'm going to hide my pain behind tears of joy as I laugh at Falcons Twitter as they have a collective meltdown over the Falcons not getting Ed Oliver.
I mean, like you said about free agency a couple shows ago, I think part of what makes this fun is you tie yourself to these players and you're like, yeah, this is the guy I want. And, you know, you get all these nice feelings of emotion and all that. And then sure, you're crushed. But again, I think the roller coaster ride that you go on, it's fun. And that's why this year, you know, Ed Oliver's that guy for me. And again, I think it's, you know, it's possible. I said, you know, a move like Gerald McCoy was possible. And, you know, who knows, I might be talking myself back into that one because the Bucs aren't getting any trade offers for him and maybe they'll let him go. And who knows, maybe the Falcons will clear some cap space for something like that. But that's another conversation for another day. Yeah, again, that's what makes draft season fun, in my opinion, is you know, hitching your wagon, as they say, to a particular player and hoping that your team drafts them. And if they do, you're super excited. I know, like, for me personally, I know it's bittersweet now, but like Vic Beasley was that guy for me in 2015. I was like, man, this would be awesome if they drafted Vic Beasley, and that came to fruition. So, you know, and I remember
it didn't turn out great though.
No, it hasn't. Like I said, it's been bittersweet. Bittersweet. Hopefully, Ed Oliver will be a much different situation if that were to happen. But no, it's all in good fun. We'll see what happens, and you know, the Falcons can go in a multitude of different directions, I think, in this draft, and I'll still come out happy. So we'll see what direction they end up choosing.
Yeah, well, look, here's what I'll say. In my defense, why I'm so jaded and bitter is 15 years ago, back in the 04 draft, I wanted the Falcons to draft Will Smith. They drafted D'Angelo Hall, and pretty much like probably at least 2/3, if not 3/4 of the last 15 drafts, I wanted the Falcons to draft a pass rusher. And in, you know, at least 10 out of the 15 years, I wanted them to draft a pass rusher. And how many pass rushers have they used their top pick on? 3. So it's one of those things where the reason why I'm so jaded and the reason why I'm like, oh, you kids today and wanting the Falcons to take these players is I've been beaten down for 15 years of the Falcons not taking the players that I want them to take. And there's a couple of times where they have, but it's, you know, it's like once every 4 or 5 years where it happens. So maybe they're due because Vic Beasley was probably the last time it happened. Yeah. So we'll see how it goes. But that's part of it. It's just like it's year after year, just like they're not taking the guy I want. Why am I going to get my hopes? You know, I'm just Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. That's just like, why am I getting all excited over something that's not going to happen?
Yeah.
So, guys, there you have it. We'll wrap up before Matt's computer dies on him. And you guys know where to hit us up on Twitter. Falcons PFC is the name of the show. I'm at FalcFans. Matt is at Matt Karoly. That's Karoly. You can find our written content at Rise Up Reader for Matt, FalcFans.com for me. Of course, you can check out ProFootballCentral.com where the show is. Falcons PFC, hashtag Falcons mailbag if you want to submit a question, fun one like the Falcons did, or, you know, serious ones in the future. Hit those up all the time. Also subscribe to Pro Football Central on YouTube. Hit that bell icon so you know when we go live. Check us out on Facebook, Falcon Central Radio. And the last couple of shows we've done Periscopes on Pro Football Central's Twitter page, and we might go back to that in the coming weeks. So you definitely want to subscribe and follow Pro Football Central on Twitter at PF Central so you don't miss those as well. And we'll keep you guys up to date about sort of what platform we are. Part of the off-season process is sort of trying to tinker and figure out what's the best format for us moving forward. So we'll get that figured out in the next couple of shows. But yeah, appreciate you guys tuning in. And we got some more draft content coming in. We will be back next week. We can promise you that. With a guest,
we're gonna pivot. We're gonna pivot to the draft now. I think these next 2 shows we got. I think a good one in store next week. We got a special guest. I think you'll enjoy. You know, heavily centered on the draft. So yeah, these next 2 are going to be heavily focused on the draft and kind of where we see the Falcons potentially going.
There you go. Appreciate you guys checking us out.